Now, I would like to introduce you all to our presenter for the day, Radhika Kolkar. Radhika works as a senior academic manager with British Council India. She has over 13 years experience in teaching, training, and designing teacher development programs. Her areas of expertise include technology in education, teacher education, and communities of practice. Through her research, she has investigated the broader implications of technology use in education and support teachers' need and effectiveness of communities of practice. She has the Cambridge Delta qualification and an MA in Digital Technologies, Education and Communication from the University of Manchester. Thank you so much once again, and over to you, Radhika.
Thank you so much, Emily. I hope I'm audible and the screen is visible to begin with.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks a lot for the introduction, and I want to extend a special thank you to all the teachers who are attending today, rather making time off from their busy schedules. I really hope that you have some concrete learning points to take away from the webinar today. So with that, I'm also going to begin my timer so that Emily doesn't control my timing at the end. Okay, so to begin with, I would like to take you all through a quick overview of what's going to happen in today's webinar. This webinar is divided in two parts. We are going to begin with reviewing some basic types of assessments and basic principles. So when I say basic types of assessments, I think I'm assuming that many of you have read about these types and you have basic awareness about them. And when I say basic principles, I mean, we are going to look at what makes an assessment or a test good and effective. We are also going to look at points or questions, sort of arrive at a checklist to help us consider before we design, adapt, or select even formative assessments specifically. And then we are going to look at the two skills that Semily talked about at the beginning as part of my introduction. We're going to focus on reading and speaking skills today. So in terms of learning outcomes then, by the end of this webinar, you will be better able to describe points to consider, questions to consider when using formative assessments, describe sub-skills for speaking and reading specifically, and identify appropriate task types for relevant sub-skills. Okay. So before I begin, I just wanted to put a note out there for all teachers. I have kept secondary teachers in mind when I designed this webinar, but I have tried to incorporate many activities for primary teachers as well. All said, they're the principles that we're going to talk about, the types of assessments we're going to look at, all are quite relevant for anybody teaching anywhere practically. So I hope all of you get something out of it. So we're going to start with a question, okay? As teachers, what have you learned from assessing your students? So it could be any type of assessment at any point in your career. What have you as a teacher learned from it? If you could type your answers in the chat box, that will be great.
Radhika, a small thing while we're waiting for answers, you might want to turn off navigation on your presentation.
Sorry. Does that okay? No?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if someone wants to unmute and speak, that's fine as well. Yeah, how well they have understood the topics and concepts from Shaman. Very important, it's an ongoing process. I think Tenzin has a very good point there. How can I help my learner? Right, common errors. All students do not learn at the same pace. I think a quick check for understanding, and just to summarize all the answers, I think very interesting that, and very assuring rather, that all of you have thought about the teaching practice itself and the relevance of what you learn from assessments to how you teach or what you teach. So I think to summarize your answers, yes, all of you are on the right track. We can know more about where students are, what levels they are at, what we need to teach more or less. Is there something we need to continue teaching or stop teaching? Yes, if there is a better technique you can use to teach something, where to change or improvise. Yes, I think all of you are on the right track. And I'm glad that you've said you've brought these points right at the start of the webinar. So thank you for that. With that, it also does take us into different types of assessments, because I noticed that some of you said, particularly most of you are talking already, seems to talk about formative assessments already. So one type of assessment is out there. Do you know any other type of assessment that tells us other things, like maybe if a student can progress from one level to the other? If you can type different types of assessments, in the chat, that's fine. Yeah, okay, formal and informal. Yes, diagnostic, summative. Absolutely. I think all of you are on the right track. So moving on, we are looking at summative format. We are talking about summative, formative, and diagnostic. So if you look at your screens, yes, I can see the chat still coming in. Yes, all good. So you look at your screens now. We look at summative first. You see a definition in front of it. Can you fill in the blank with the most appropriate word that comes to your mind? So for those on the phone, if it helps, I can read it out for you. So the definition is usually blank exams which are certificated and allow students to progress. Example, the standard 10 and standard 12 exams, degree exams, or professional qualifications. So usually written, summative exams, descriptive, okay. Board exams, end-term exams. All right, let's hold your answers for just a bit. We are going to the next one. I'm going to show you all the answers, but we're going to look at the formative assessments quickly. Again, there are two blanks here, usually dash tests which are uncertificated and are used to help students and teachers understand how well the students are blank. Example, end of term, semester test, topic test. I'll give you a couple of, not couple of minutes, but maybe a few seconds to guess. Okay, periodic could be. Yes. I like periodic, could be progressing, random, regular, surprise. Okay. Yearly, quarterly. All right, okay. Let's again, please, I have a record of your answers here, so we'll revisit them. Just moving on to the diagnostic tests then again. There is one blank there. Lena, the screen is moving at my end. Maybe the connection is weak. Comprehension, picture composition. Okay, knowledge. I think Tanushri is. I'll just call out the name for now and you'll know why. I think we'll move to the answers quickly. Absolutely. I think Tanushri came closest, but not to say that all your answers were wrong. Many of you came very close. The answers are on the screen, but again, this is, you have to guess what the word could be from the context. So it could be many, there could be many possibilities. So well done on that. So I think we got the three types of assessments quite clear in our minds. And as I mentioned earlier, we are going to focus on formative assessments primarily in this webinar today. So moving on, I wanted to make sure that I use this picture once, at least in one of my webinars, especially for assessments. I'm sure that this is a very popular picture. I've come across it myself many times, and I'm sure you must have too. So when you look at this picture and think about assessments, what comes to your mind? Like, what is the implication of this picture for assessments? And you can unmute yourself, and we can have mics on for this one. Okay, multiple intelligence, unrealistic. Weighed the wrong way. I think that's a very interesting one. Yes, maybe the candidates are not marked correctly, or right. Irony, yes. One size doesn't fit all. I think that sums it up for us. Very obvious. So with this in mind, then, what do you think are what are the different elements of a good test? If you could complete this statement for me, because you were on the right track here, that the picture said that the assessments need to be thought through, and a particular assessment may be fair to someone and unfair to someone. So you're on the right track. But then what is a good assessment? What are the features or elements? Can you complete this sentence for me? Okay, a good test is one that is scaffolded to different levels of learners. Right, helps a learner and a teacher differentiated, assess the learning outcome. Okay, that's a very good one. Concept-based, reliable. Okay. Okay. To meet the needs of each child. All right, yes. Summarize all the answers so far in the chat. Absolutely on point. Thanks, Meenakshi, and I think one more teacher who has already brought up concepts like reliability and validity. We're going to revisit them in a short while. But good points. Yes, we have to look at assessing the learning outcomes. So somebody's unmuted.
Radhika, can you unmute yourself, please?
Oh, sorry, that's very odd.
Sorry, yeah, I disabled the mics again, but you went on.
Okay, okay. So just give me a second because I've lost my presentation for some reason. I'm just reloading it. Sorry, everyone. Some reason. Okay, so yes, I was at summarizing your responses. Yes, reliable, valid. Somebody's also talking about positive backwash. Absolutely. Also, I like this point from Saleha that everyone should understand the test. Yes, your outcomes and criteria, how you're going to mark the test, all of that needs to be communicated to students. I think we are at a good point to move on to the principles then of assessments. So you can see on your screen, on the left, you see the principles, the purpose, validity, reliability, and manageability. These are some of you have already mentioned these, so I'm guessing you already know them. If you could match the definition to the principle, you can put all 4 answers together, take your time, and put all the answers in the chat. Okay, to C. All right. Okay. Okay. So far, so good. I will already tell you that so far you've got most of them correct. All of them actually correct. Yes. So we have 1A, 2C, 3D, 4B. That's correct. So here are the answers on your screen again. Manjulata, you may want to look at the answers. You got a couple of them mixed up, but otherwise you're fine. So yes, so just to review the principles, some of you already said that, you know, the purpose of the goal of the assessment needs to be clear to the teacher and to the students. Validity, are we testing what we mean to test really? Reliability, how far the results of an assessment repeatable. If you keep the same conditions, are your students going to get the similar scores at different points in time? And most importantly, I think in the Indian context, manageability is very important, isn't it? Because we deal with such large classes. I feel that that's one important aspect that we need to keep in mind when, sorry about that, thinking about assessments. So yes, Harpreet, I note your answers. That's a correct one, and the answers are on the screen. But just to move on, quick test, not a test really for you, but just to see how the principles really work in when we look at an assessment. There are two assessments on your screen. Write 5 words related to travel. That's the assessment. That's a test that the teacher wants to give, but the purpose is slightly different. If you read carefully, can you identify which one is a better, more effective, or rather a good assessment? This is a very simple example, but tests are often more complex than that. So Lena, do you want to unmute yourself and say why do you think the second one is a better one?
Can Lena raise her hand so it's easier for us to unmute her?
That's fine. Maybe somebody has raised their hand, but okay, so she doesn't have an option to raise hand, it seems.
We have got 4 people who've raised hands. We can.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, you can unmute.
Okay, so can we enable mics for everyone, and then we can ask Shilpa perhaps to unmute?
Yes, I've done that.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, Alicia this side. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. So tell me, why do you think the second one is better?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So I can say the purpose of the second one is to assess how well students can recollect the right words related to travel. So they are not just writing something randomly which comes to their mind. There is a purpose, like they have to think and they have to remember what they were taught earlier, and then they have to write the words which they remember from travel, like what comes in their mind from that word. So I think the purpose is
mute everyone, Judith. Thank you very much. I heard most of what you said. You are on the right track. If I understood you correctly, you said that seems like something previously done has been assessed here. Apologies because I couldn't hear everything you said. But let me just summarize this task in the interest of time. Yes, you're all right. The second one is better simply because it's testing the skill that is in the purpose, right? The second one says that the teacher wants to assess how well students can recollect and write words, and that is why the teacher has given a written task to the students, whereas the first one wants to test spoken skills, but the teacher is asking it to write something which is a mismatch, and then it is a problem of validity, basically. Yes, thank you. Yes, Umanshu, thank you very much. That's pretty, Umanshu's message pretty much sums that up. So moving ahead then, you know, I said that we will also look at questions that we may want to ask ourselves as teachers when we look at any assessment. There are many activities that are readily available sometimes that can be turned into quick, short formative tests. Sometimes we need to design them and sometimes we need to adapt these existing activities. So what are the things that we should think about when looking at assessment? So we've looked at purpose. Again, there's a small task. I promise there is a reason why I'm giving you these tasks. So for purpose, there's a question I have framed. Can you look, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you have options there to choose from. So can you select the right option and use it for gap number 1? So is the blank of assessment clear to you, and is it clearly communicated to the students? Absolutely. Okay, that's correct. Goal is correct. The second one. Does the assessment blank to a specific learning outcome or learning point? Yes. Directly relate to, that's correct. In terms of reliability, there are 2 questions I have. Does it say dash what students are required to do? Yes. Thank you. You have solved the next one as well. Absolutely, it's clearly and fair. And the last one, this is a very simple one. Whatever remains, isn't it? Whatever is left in the options. So it's efficient. The fourth one. Here are the answers for you. So, you know, for some of us who sometimes get intimidated by these terms, like I do get intimidated by these terms sometimes when I actually practice these, put these principles into practice. I always think of these questions, simple questions that I can ask myself to make sure I'm making the right choice. So I thought that I would share that with you and maybe it's helpful. So moving on, this is our first part and I'm slightly running behind time as expected. We are going to move into the skills part of the thing, but so far I'm really loving the energy and your participation in the chat box. Thank you very much. Keep it on. Moving to the speaking skills then. We're looking at you see the word sub-skills on the screen. So can you tell me, what do you actually do when you read when you say something? What are the different smaller skills you put into practice when you speak? Let's imagine that you are explaining directions to someone at a railway station. What are the different things that you do? Very, very interesting. Yes, gestures, thinking, organizing, framing. Salutation, yes, of course. Clear and relevant, keeping it short. Chandni, I guess you mean register, which is also very important. Absolutely. Discourse markers, greeting, body language, all on the right track. Yes, thank you very much. So some of them are on the screen. Pronunciation, intelligibility, fluency, you've already covered that. Voice modulation, communicating a message. So some of you already said that you need to organize the message. You have to be very clear and specific about what you're saying in that context, by any context really. Sorry, and also language for different purposes. I think someone said register there, and thanks for bringing that up. Um, so if you were explaining something to these directions to a stranger at a railway station, you will use a different kind of language. Your choice of words will be different. But if you're speaking to a 3-year-old and talking about something else, it's going to be, the choice of words are going to be very different from the first situation. And that is again something we need to work out when we produce an effective spoken message, right? So this list on the screen is not exhaustive. These can be called as sub-skills, but there are more. Some of you already said some gestures and body language or intonation. All of these are as important as these, right? Yes, very important, depends on who is at the receiving end, absolutely. Let's keep the sub skills in mind, but move on to the task types. So in your experience, what kind of tasks have you used for assessing speaking, especially for formative assessments? Continuous speaking. Yes. Yes, Diksha, discussions, jam sessions. Yes. So I have 4 of them. Again, not exhaustive. These can be adapted for different things. Most common ones are interviews. You can do a one-to-one session where you ask questions to your students. You can do a group discussion. Dialogues, yes, Sandhya Rani, absolutely. Role plays, dialogues, oral presentations. I think that's what some of you meant, where there is a person presenting something like a monologue, really. So for an interview, you could, have them describe something, get them to introduce themselves, get them to present opinions or views for more advanced level students. In group discussions, you can look at getting the group to compare things, arrive at an agreement, or decide an opinion, like agree on an opinion on something, or even simply discuss opinions about burning matters around them. Role plays, we already looked at this example of finding directions. Just an example, giving advice, giving information. I'm just going to look at the make a story. Yes, absolutely. Socratic seminars, that's interesting, Chandi. Thank you for bringing that up. And oral presentations could be that's pretty unlimited. You can do a lot with one-way presentation, a range of topics or a range of issues that can be discussed. Telling a story, introducing oneself, again, come under this. So I think, if you look at these task types, it's pretty clear that they seem like activities that we do generally when practicing language skills in the classroom, right? There is not much difference. We also use interviews and group discussions when we are teaching a language point. But I think why we looked at the sub-skills, something to keep in mind as teachers is to when you use these activities to specifically test something, then you need to be clear as a teacher what sub-skill you're testing here. What is it exactly you're testing? Why are you testing? And how are you going to mark it? How are you going to give feedback? All those aspects come into play. And that is where there is the line of difference comes in, where you looking at an activity just for language teaching and practicing purpose, and then looking at an activity for testing something. So that is why we looked at sub-skills as well. Puppet shows and symposiums, very interesting. Absolutely. I think this puppet show idea is very good for all levels, but maybe primary levels more so. So let's do some practice now quickly. You have a picture. I borrowed this picture from one of your textbooks. Maybe it's not very clear, but you can find opportunity if it's not clear. Can you think of what sub-skill you can test using this picture? What kind of activity you can do? What kind of task type you can do? So for your convenience, to jog your memory, I have put the sub-skills, examples of some sub-skills on the screen, and you can just, if you can think a little more about what sub-skill and what task type, because those two are connected to some extent. So we have some answers: conveying message through their skills, a skit or a poetry painting, vocabulary knowledge. I think storytelling, Gayatri, you're right. Storytelling is something that comes very naturally. The picture lends itself to it very naturally. Yes, vocab and grammar could be one of the sub-skill. What kind of task type, if you want to assess vocabulary and grammar, if you want to, if you are, if you're looking at the sub-skill first, then you have to be very careful about the task type. So if it's a storytelling, that's what your decision is, then the sub-skill that you want to test, it would be nice, it would be efficient to identify that. Right, okay, storytelling seems to come out a lot. As I said, it lends itself very naturally to that. Elocution, yes. I agree. So some of these activities, like task types like storytelling or picture composition, even organizing a message, could be one of the sub skills. They lend themselves better to sub skills like fluency, for example, or if you are making one of the things I thought about when looking at the picture was a group discussion where you are getting them to guess what is under the bush, what is it, because it's actually not clear even in the textbook when I saw. So it could be turned into a group discussion. It could be turned into a decision-making group discussion where the students decide whether to help. There is one animal there, that's for sure. So if they should help the animal, and if they should guess what's happening, what is the situation. So there are many things, many ways you can adapt this. I just wanted to make one point about the sub skills and task types. Some of you guessed them right. There is no right and wrong answer there. It's just that both the sub skill and the task type are connected. So if you're using something like a storytelling or an oral presentation, then most likely you're looking for vocabulary knowledge and fluency, and all the other sub skills come into play, but some of them will be more dominant than the others. So you may want to make that very clear to yourself and think that through a little more. How many sub skills is it good to test in one assessment? To be honest, I don't have the right answer for it, but my logic says that most of them are interconnected, but you can, depending on what you have taught them, what the focus of your lessons has been, maybe a couple of them should be good to test in one assessment. Let's look at the next one quickly. This is again an activity from your textbook, one of your textbooks. So can you think how you can adapt this maybe, or can you use it as is for an assessment? So for those on the phone, if you think it helps, I can read it out. The task says work in groups, come to some agreement on each of the activities given below, decide which is the most interesting, dullest, most dangerous, safest, most rewarding, and most exciting of the activities. Grammar knowledge, group discussion. I think, yeah, Hina, I agree that maybe group discussion is very good here. Yes, role plays, interviews, oral presentation. I do like the idea of oral presentation as well here, because you can, one idea that came to my mind was what if we could have one-to-one interview or an oral presentation on a particular student's preference of activities amongst these. So that is also one thing you could explore. But again, yes, if I were to use this as an assessment, there is one change definitely that I will make. Can you guess what that is? Yes, a debate is possible. So I'm just going to tell you what it is. There is a lot happening in this activity. Decide which is the most interesting, dullest, most dangerous, safest, most rewarding, and most exciting. Maybe for the purpose, maybe even if I were using it as an activity, not for testing specifically, I would reduce the scope of what students need to do in that activity to make it more effective. I think you all are on track. Yes, reduce the number of options even, Hina, yes. Yes, sharing opinions, absolutely. So, treasure hunt, interesting. I mean, we may need more time to think about that, Chandni, but seems like you have thought through. If we have time at the end, maybe you can tell us. I'm moving on to the next skill, reading sub-skills. So just like we thought about the speaking sub-skills, what are the specific smaller steps that we take when we speak and produce a spoken message? What are the things that we do when we read something? So let's say you're reading something, an announcement board at a railway station. So we are looking at reading skills now, right? So unless you are expecting students to read aloud, yes, skimming, yes, very important, Momita, identifying comprehension, skim and scan, absolutely. I'm not sure what you mean by fluency, unless you mean reading fluency. Expressions. Okay, if you're narrating something, but that's again spoken, so identification of words, absolutely. So I have some for you. Summarizing main ideas, like often when we read long texts such as newspapers, we quickly skim, as you said, and we summarize main ideas. I think it was Hina who said word recognition and recall, very important. You have to identify, Momita also said that. You have to recognize the spelling, the form, and you do all that, at the same time while making meaning from the text. And you have to also recall the meaning of things. Vocabulary knowledge of grammar. So yeah, some of you did say that. Connecting information is very important. Making inferences, yes, that's what I meant, Hina. We sometimes have to connect information from within the text, and sometimes we have to connect information that we already have about the text or a similar topic. So again, like speaking skills, here the ideas are not exhaustive. There are many more sub-skills that you can come up with, but these I felt are the most relevant, most important ones, applicable to all types of readings. So then, just like we looked at common task types for spoken, there is one example on the screen for common task types when it comes to reading skills. Can you guess others? What are the other ones? Like skimming, scanning could be one of rather techniques, but you could ask them to skim or scan. That could be a task type. Any others? Prediction. Yes, absolutely. Paraphrasing, close reading, summarize, picture comprehension. Do you remember a couple of things that we did in today's session where you were given tasks that I could have used to assess your reading skills? Do you remember today we did 2 of them? Yes, Tanushri, you're right. We did 2 of close tests or gap fills. Just to jog your memory again, right at the beginning when we did 3 types of assessments, I gave you a very difficult task actually to guess what the word is. And then later on when we looked at those questions to think about when deciding on assessments, you did a gap fill exercise, but that time around you had options which made it slightly more easy. Yes, Divya, you're right. So that is another option. Summarizing ideas, you said it already. Paraphrasing, true and false, like you could have these yes, no, or true or false kind of statements to assess reading as well. MCQs, yes, absolutely, Tenzin. Sequencing, very interesting. Yeah, this one I did not get it. So thanks, Manisha, for bringing that into the conversation. Information gap, absolutely. Telling the gist, by which we say summarizing and paraphrasing. Information transfer, have you heard of this one? Information transfer. So basically, it just necessarily means that if you give a text to read and you ask students to transfer what they understand into a map format or an outline or a diagram or a drawing or a graph or a pie chart or something like that. And the last is selecting appropriate headings and titles. That's also a very good thing to do, task to do with even could work for primary and secondary level students. Information transfer works very nicely for primary, and we'll see how. Yes, mapping, Manju, yes, that's correct. So just to jump into practice, here's one task. There is some text on the screen for you. This is a reading task, but for those who are on phones maybe and cannot read, I'm just quickly going to read it out for you. We are going to do a similar thing here where we're going to look at sub-skills that we may want to focus on and task types that may suit this text, right? So I spotted it in a junk shop in Bridport, a roll top desk. The man said it was early 19th century and oak. I had wanted one, but they were far too expensive. This one was in a bad condition, the roll top in several pieces, one leg clumsily mended, scotch marks all down one side. It was going for very little money. I thought I could restore it. It would be a risk, a challenge, but I had to have it. I paid the man and brought it back to my workroom at the back of the garage. I began work on it on Christmas Eve. So this is, of course, a snip from a story. Yes, Rashmi, I agree that vocabulary could be one of the testing things here, but anything else? Yes, best Christmas present in the world. That could be the title of the story. Yeah, I think some of the latest ideas have come in the chat. Absolutely. Summarizing could be one. I also feel that this is a text which could be difficult for some of our students, depending on what grade we are using it for. And it could mean that we may just want to use a true or false or summarizing activity, as you've said. And connecting information is very important here. There's a lot of information in that text that needs to be brought together and made sense of. Yes, true, false, MCQ. Absolutely, absolutely. I am going to the next task. This one I really like. Again, for those who are on phone, I'm going to read it out quickly. Many students today struggle with time management. Recently, a local school conducted a survey with 50 students. Results showed 40 out of 50 students didn't spend enough time planning their day or week. This leads to most students getting distracted, not being able to complete tasks on time. However, 10 out of 50 students did plan their day. They made small to-do lists for the day to keep them on track with activities. They also made timetables to guide them through the week or the month. Few students use a planning app to plan their day. All 50 students said they needed more help with managing time. This is not a text from your textbooks, but this is something I just put together for one particular task type. Reportage, okay. Tanushri, I think you are on point. I agree. Information transfer is very good for this. So something, yes, Tenzin, pie chart or a graph, because there's so many numbers. Connecting information, yes. Chani, your idea is also doable. I particularly find this activity very good for asking students to turn the information into a pie chart or key points. Again, true or false could be another task type that you can use here. Yes, to be somebody has summarized very well. It's data analysis and understanding numbers with words at the same time. I think I have time for one activity. Becky, do I have time for one more for primary level?
Possibly, yes. You've got about 10 minutes left. So.
Okay, maybe
questions.
Maybe quickly, yeah, maybe quickly. I thought I found one task for you for, for those teachers who have joined us from the primary levels. This I found in one of your textbooks. I'm sorry for rushing through. I'm conscious that we're short of time. So this is a small poem in the textbook, but what task type can you use here? Kang flew into the sky, he flew to the moon, he flew through a cloud, he slipped down a tree. Kang woke up with a bang, I think. Yes. Okay. Sequencing could be, yes, that could be a nice task. Divya, yes, poetic devices, but maybe for secondary, maybe not so easy, depending on what you do exactly for primary. Yes, I think, Deepika, I agree with you. That was the idea that came to my mind. Draw your imagination after listening to the poem, or even draw what you read. Could be like an information transfer kind of a task. But with that, I think I'm going to stop. You please let your ideas keep coming in the chat. Yes, presentation specimens, what you feel. I'm just sorry. I'm so sorry. I have to move on. Just a final checklist for you all to take away. Simply, we looked at principles, we looked at the two different skills, and I felt that, when we bring all, as I said earlier, when we bring those principles into practice, just a final checklist as very simple simple points that we could keep in mind. Write down clearly the objective of the assessment, decide on a suitable format or a task type, decide on marking scheme. So this is something we did not deal with today in the webinar, but marking scheme and feedback, especially for large classes, quite tricky. Write clear instructions. I like step 5 the most. Tell your students about the purpose of the assessment, what is expected, and how there is a typo, how it will be assessed. And most importantly, pilot and revise. If you do get the time, you can try it with a smaller group of students or with your colleagues before you finalize it. So that's it. This is adapted from a blog written by Richard Frost. If you're interested, the link is on the screen and it will be in one of the slides. But while I also take questions, if you could also share your reflections with me, really, it will be really useful for me to understand what you learned. One thing you learned, something new that you learned today, one thing you will use in the classroom, and one thing you will find out more about. Can I request Emily to post the Padlet link in the chat box for them to share reflections while I take questions? Thank you, Judith.
Yes, give me a moment.
Yes. So I'm happy to take questions. I think we have around 7 minutes for that. Thank you, Lena.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Radhika. So we'll take questions now.
Yes.
We're going to enable microphones, but before we do that, just to mention that we will only take questions about this topic of assessment and the webinar content today. If you have questions about the certificate or the feedback form, then we will answer those at 4 o'clock. So just be patient and we will get to those. Okay, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand and then we will invite you to unmute. So I'm going to allow mics for all attendees. So let's try. So if you've got your hand up, I'm going to ask you if you have a question. I'll see, Radhika, if you see any questions in the chat, you can answer those directly.
Yes. Yes, so Sarvan says, how can we deal with specially abled kids in this regard? I think it's a very good question, Sarvan. I really apologize. I don't have this speciality, but what I can do is if I find some information, I'll post it on the Padlet wall. But I'm very glad you brought that question up, because to be honest, my experience is not so strong in that area. But is there anyone else who has an answer to that? Maybe we can quickly look at that. So Sarvan asks, how can we deal with specially abled kids in this regard? But something that quickly comes to our mind is, again, sorry, there is this constant notification for Padlet. Something that comes quite quickly to me is we have to probably take into consideration whether these students are part of the mainstream group of students in the classroom, or are you teaching a group of students who need that kind of support. And again, it just goes down to task types, what suits everyone, maybe a lot more thought into that, probably more than sub skills, like what are the task types that could be fair to them, fair to that. Oh
Should we
God,
try,
there's a notification.
should we try an audio question?
Yes, sure.
Hina, would you like to unmute your microphone and ask your question? Sometimes people can't unmute, so I give a few seconds, and if that doesn't work. Okay, great. Hina, we could hear you.
Am I audible? So yeah, I have about 80 students in my classroom, and they're very, very diverse in terms of their learning levels. So when we talk about making assessments more manageable, could you like help me with some tips? How can I make it more manageable when I have diverse groups and a large number?
Absolutely. I think that's a very, very good question, Hina. Some things that that immediately, does this notification, can you hear this notification? Or is it bothering you guys?
Can't hear anything, no, just you.
Okay, then it's just me. Okay, so Hina, I think there are two things that I can think of to deal with large classes, and most of the task types that we discussed may not all be suitable for large classes, but you could look at self-assessment and peer assessments for your large classes, especially for secondary students. Even for primary students, there could be some tasks you could look at, consider that. The only thing that we need to keep in mind when we use self or peer assessment is we need to train students before we do something like this so that the assessment itself is fair. Often students in the context we work in are not always put into a position where they have to assess things. They do that as part of activities, but not always as part of formative assessment. So if you get them used to it, if you make self and peer assessments more predictable for them, and it comes naturally to them, then the assessments that you do through using those techniques could be more fairer to them. The other thing is you can always consider group assessments. So some of the task types like group discussions lend themselves very well for large classes. What I'm trying to say is, to summarize, you can reduce the number of individual assessments and you can increase the number of self and peer assessments, but not do away with, it shouldn't replace one or the other. I think that should help. I hope I answered.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, shall we try Kushbu? Would you like to try unmuting yourself? We've got time for one or two more questions, and then
sure.
Lots of people are asking for the feedback form link.
Yes.
That will be in the chat shortly at 4 o'clock once the webinar has finished. Kushbu, are you able to unmute? If not, Umanshu, do you want to try unmuting yourself, Umanshu? And you can ask your question or give your comment. Okay, Meena, would you like to try unmuting yourself? Okay, so I think maybe some people are not able to unmute themselves. If you have got a question, you can put it in the chat once it's come up. Research.
Yes, so I think one question, Becky, that is in the chat from Anu, I think, are there any research papers, books we can read? Yes, I have a few in further reading for you. So here, just give me a second. So there is, if you can see on your screens, there is one book that is reading in this is specifically for reading skills, but it's a very useful one. I looked at it to prepare for this webinar as well. So Reading in a Second Language by William Gray. And if you use this link, there is a chapter that is available on the Cambridge website for you to read quickly. Not the whole book, but one chapter. But in terms of research, I found a couple of things you can see on the screen. So there is a very interesting, especially for, I was hoping that you also asked something about, not hoping, but expecting questions around online formative assessment. So I've found one case study paper for you. there, and there are a couple more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. I have one final question for myself. The Padlet for reflection, how long will that be open for?
I haven't decided, but I can keep it open for the rest of the day if that helps. And close it tonight. Yeah.
Okay. Did you see any more questions in the chat that you wanted to answer?
No questions. 1 second. For secondary, best website for reading. I'm assuming for reading tasks, if that it's really a wide range of things that you can read online, but maybe just newspapers or blogs could be a good start.
And I'd always recommend our website, Teaching English.
Yeah, of course. Beyond that. Please share these things and no more questions in chat. Can you share previous slide again to save link? Kritika, was it the sources or?
I will say that we will be putting the recording and the PowerPoint slides up onto our website, hopefully within the next 7 days. That is what we aim to do. So you can go to our English Connect page and access the recording and the PowerPoint slides.
Yeah.
Okay, Radhika.
I think, yeah, that's it.
The questions there. Thank you very much for a fantastic session. I think you've seen all the comments thanking you and how useful the session was. So we appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we had a lovely group of participants. Thank you very much.